And we're back to the book of Chronicles, which obviously means back to some of the genealogies. But I believe this is the end of the genealogies. After this, we now go into proper stories. So chapter 7 details the genealogies of Issachar, Naphtali, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Asher. We know that Benjamin had 10 sons, if you remember from the book of Genesis. But here we see the record of just 3 of them. And as I mentioned, Chronicles focus, the chronicler's focus was basically on David and his sort of lineage to the throne. So I understand why the focus may have just been on these 3 sons of Benjamin. The genealogy of Ephraim concluded with Joshua, Moses' successor, who led the people to conquer the promised land. Remember that when I mentioned that the Chronicles was just a repetition, was not just a repetition, even though some people thought that it was, but it contains a few new facts. The story of Ezer and Eliad in verse 20 of chapter 7 is one of these. Previously, we knew the story. Previously, the story was unknown, but it explains the naming of Beriah, Joshua's ancestors. So these are some of the things that I think make it new and fresh, when you're reading it and just think, oh, I've read all of this before, even though I dare you to remember all the names. Joseph's inheritance is named for his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and the land was divided between them. Ephraim was the chosen son and therefore the dominant tribe. It's also a name for the northern kingdom of Israel after a war broke out that divided the kingdoms, right? And it meant a loss of territory. And so the reduction of the land of Israel happened. We'll see that as we go on. So that portion of their land was what was called Israel at some point. And chapter 8 details the genealogy of Saul of the tribe of Benjamin. Although may have appeared to be a repetition, it wasn't, of the previous genealogy of Benjamin that we saw in 7:6-12. This one actively lists additional descendants and focuses on Saul as the central figure. The genealogy of Benjamin is quite long. Judah and Levi are the longest, but then Benjamin's is equally as long. And the double genealogy could be indicative of the split in the tribe. As we read along, we'll find out. So we'll probably see more, about the Benjamites later. Chapter 9 lets us know that Judah were taken into captivity to Babylon due to their unfaithfulness, and then goes on to list the genealogy of those that returned afterwards. The focus on the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh, all who returned were living in Jerusalem. And the religious, and at the time, Jerusalem was the religious capital of Israel at the point of the writing. It also details those serving and involved in the operations of the tabernacle. The gatekeepers numbered 212. Some were in charge of serving vessels, caring for the furnishing and the implements of the sanctuary, as well as flour, wine, incense, and spices, and then baking the offering bread and all of that. There were also musicians. So hitherto we had seen, when we learned about the Levites, we had learned about all these other Levites who served in the temple, but we never really heard about musicians until now. Another genealogy of Saul gives the details of the time before the exile and introduces Saul as the one whose reign preceded David's. Chapter 10 gives a review of Saul's death along with his sons, the same story that we heard in 1 Samuel 31. But here we see the way that the Philistines treated Saul's body showed the destruction of his dynasty, and his death was explained here as a punishment for sin, characterized by unfaithfulness, and as a result, the kingdom was taken to him and given to David, who was God's chosen. Now here's my hashtag getting to know God lesson. God does not endorse or stand for unfaithful leaders. Verse 14 says that God put Saul to death, and that's because he turned out to be a less than ideal an unfaithful king. God didn't allow him to lead. He did not allow him to remain king over his people, and gave the kingdom to a more deserving person who would lead them into the way that God wanted him to lead. So he would essentially lead them as God led him, and that was David. God is protective of his people, so he won't let us have bad leaders. That's you and me. I found this very comforting, especially for me being a Nigerian. God really needs to come through for us in terms of leadership. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we'll go back to the Psalms again. And I know it's a lot of hopscotching, like I said, but very soon we'll see how these stories kind of align. And tomorrow I'll be sharing lessons from Psalm 102 to 104. Thank you for joining me. See you tomorrow. Bye.